Patriarchy is not failing feminist cinema. Bad storytelling is. Unfortunately, when modern media loses the ability to craft a compelling, structurally sound narrative, it rebrands the ideology itself as the reason for failure. The audience walks away from the movie thinking feminism is the reason why so many female centric movies are so bad. But the problem is the broken machinery of the script, the bad writing behind it, not feminism itself. As a storyteller and a writer, and of course a woman, I want to look past the general internet discourse and break down the exact reason, the exact narrative strategy behind why we keep failing to tell good feminist stories, particularly in mainstream media. By the end of this video, you will not only understand the structural flaws behind why so many female led narratives fail to resonate with the general audience, you will also probably have a blueprint of, how to engineer a compelling, really good feminist narrative of your own. Let's head to the courtyard. Before we take a deep dive into the mechanics of storytelling itself, I want to briefly map out the territory. I want to give you a outlook of overview of what we will be talking about. When you dissect modern failing feminist narratives, the collapse almost always traces back to what I think fundamental structural flaws, structural failures, what I call as like the four pillars of bad feminist writing. Pillar one, manifesto, not characters. Protagonists in these movies, they are denied human ego because they are built to serve as an ideological shield. They are treated like manifestos, as I'll explain later. Pillar two, the us versus them binary, the us versus them narrative, where every male character is flattened into a caricature of villainy, forcing the narrative into a simplistic war of absolute opposition, as in we women are on this side, all men are this side, and we are fighting each other. And then pillar three, the devaluation of softness, the looking down upon emotion, vulnerability, and saying that a lack of it is the only definition of strength, which ironically actually loops back to looking down on traditional femininity itself. And of course, the last pillar, tactical conformity, the absolute lack of diversity in these stories, and not in terms of just like identity, race, class, no, not just that, but just in terms of traits, character traits, the fact that all of these characters do not feel different human beings, they all feel like the same person. So let's get down and let's dismantle these pillars one by one. The primary reason why modern female protagonists feel so hollow is that they are not written as characters at all. They are written as walking manifestos for the feminist movement. Their narrative function is not to live a life or be part of the story or move the story forward. They are there to explicitly preach why feminism is good, why you should support it, and why the ideology is flawless. And right here lies the structural trap. In the logic of debate, if a manifesto has even a single flaw, that flaw can be weaponized by the opposition to tear down the ideology. Because writers are terrified of giving the critiques any ammunition, they refuse to let their characters be, yeah, flawed, genuinely possess genuine human flaws, messy human flaws. If a female protagonist in, let's say, a modern action film, it cannot take down an enemy twice her size who's clearly physically stronger than her, the writer starts to panic because the writer fears that if the character, the female protagonist, struggles to take her enemy down without external help, particularly from a man, the narrative fails to prove that women are omnipotent. But this, I think, is a catastrophic misunderstanding of the entire feminist movement's core philosophy. The profound truth of feminism, I think, has never been that women can do everything. It is that women should be allowed to do everything and anything they want to. Whatever they are interested in, they should be allowed to do that. It doesn't matter if they can or they cannot. The truth is, like, tell me, there is not a single human being on this earth, irrespective of gender, who's omnipotent or who can do anything. Human capacity is inherently limited. Like, tell me, like, do all men know how to fight? Do all men know how to lead or build or cook? No, absolutely not. But men cannot do everything, that's true. But society gives them the grace of individualism. They are allowed the freedom to fail, to try, to be incompetent without their entire gender being put on trial for that. When you strip a female character of her limitations to make her like a perfect feminist icon, you take away the flaws out of her, you don't empower her. You dehumanize her because being human is really connected to being flawed. True narrative empowerment is not creating a woman like who can do everything. It is creating a flawed, specific woman who has the absolute right to face her own limitations on her own terms. Instead of giving us a complex, living character who can portray the messy reality of actual women, these narratives often hand us a sterile blueprint of what a woman is expected to be in some sort of utopian feminist world. And it forces us to ask this terrifying question to ourselves, that why are women still expected to be perfect at everything? This narrative trend completely destroys the historical struggle of feminist movement. True liberation was never about gaining the right to be flawless. It was about gaining the absolute freedom for women to not be perfect all the time. It was to fight for the right to be human. Furthermore, from a pure just storytelling point of view, this is simply catastrophic writing. In the architecture of a great story, a good story, a protagonist must start with a psychological wound, a blind spot, or an explicit character flaw. The entire narrative engine relies on character arc, the painful transformative journey where they learn to overcome those flaws through conflict. But our modern corporate feminist icons are structurally stagnant. They are completely perfect from the start of the story to the end, from the first frame to the final credits. They are perfect. They don't have a character arc. They just have a victory lap. They go from defeating enemies to defeating enemies. There is nobody defeating them in between or at anywhere in the story. And that is exactly why audiences are rejecting these stories. It isn't because of a hidden bias against female leads, it's because the characters feel utterly synthetic. They feel unrealistic. Like, tell me one human being who has never failed at anything that they have tried to, attempt. They don't relieve these characters, these feminist icons, they don't relieve pressure on real world women. They exponentially increase it. Once again, the narrative burden falls entirely on the woman to constantly prove her worth to the audience. She has to hit every single specification on an hyper independent checklist. She must effortlessly master physical combat, must maintain a sharp, armored, untouchable snark. She must loudly broadcast that she has no need for partnership, specifically male partnership. Like, God forbid a woman needs a man and, seeks help from a man. She must be entirely self-reliant, financially dominant, and emotionally bulletproof. This is an exhausting amount of labor to demand from a character, and in relation to that, through the character, real people, real women. Like, that's a lot to demand from real women. It is a tragedy that under the disguise of enlightenment, extreme perfectionism is still the entry fee for a woman to lead her own story. Let's be entirely, direct here with these things. These narratives are not feminist. Simply pasting a female protagonist onto a script does not magically turn that story into feminist. True representations requires something more than just that. It requires something more radical. It requires engineering a protagonist who is allowed to stumble, fall, grieve, and grow. A character who's treated as a full human being first and who just happens to be a woman. Feminism, like if you strip away all the digital noise, all the discourse surrounding it, has a beautifully straightforward foundational definition to it. While the discourse, of course, expands into complex psychology, if you look at its absolute core, at the heart of it, it's about one thing: equality, balanced systemic equality. So, how did our mainstream narrative stray so far into a bitter, hyper polarized us versus them war of absolute opposition? Why are modern feminist scripts so obsessed with painting men as the exclusive cartoonish villains of a female protagonist's life? In these flat narratives, every single systemic failure, a personal stumble, or an atmospheric conflict in a woman's life must be retrofitted with a man's face. Like the reason has to be a man. Like she's stagnant in her career, a man is actively blocking her. She cannot live in peace, a man is terrorizing her neighborhood. She feels misunderstood, a man is explicitly belittling her. Now, okay, let's be entirely grounded here. Women do face very real structural prejudice, microaggressions, and systemic boundaries in society, particularly from men, every single day. And I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. So, therefore, portraying those harsh realities on screen, that is not an exaggeration. It is a necessary truth telling. It is what is the reality. Like it is you'll have to show it. It's the reality. You can't hide from it. But when a script dictates that every single male character must either be an active abuser or a bumbling misogynist, or that if the man just happens to be the good guy, he has to be like completely submissive, muted background prop to the heroine, we create this profound narrative vacuum in the story. The structural reason this happens goes back to the point one, the pillar one that we discussed, because writers refuse to give our female protagonists an internal struggle, because internal struggle comes from flaws. And without flaws, there is no internal struggle. And therefore, the entire conflict of the story, the stakes of the story have to be driven by something entirely external. In storytelling, stakes are often a mix of internal and external problems, internal and external struggles. But when you strip away internal struggles, the entire, heavy lifting falls on external conflict. Yeah, everything in the story, all the stakes in the story must now be driven and manufactured through an external conflict engine. To make the plot move forward, the script is then forced to place men into a singular, highly predictable role, the obstacle. And this creates a massive sort of crisis in audience psychology, if you may. When empathetic, well intentioned men who genuinely want to support women, and they sit down to watch these feminist films or read these feminist books, they look at the male caricatures that are portrayed in these films and experience a total breakdown of connection. Like they are not able to relate to these men at all because none of what those men represent what they actually think and believe in. Because the aggressively defensive man whose ego is going to get hurt by these movies or is going to be challenged by these movies isn't the one who's going to buy the tickets to watch these movies or buy the book to read these books. Like he will just stray away from these because it's never his interest to begin with. The ones actually going and watching these narratives, engaging with these narratives are men who are genuinely interested in supporting women, who genuinely care about female-led narratives. So when they walk into the theater and then see this narrative that completely misrepresents who they are, their lived reality is misrepresented, they of course are going to reject it. Like, imagine a woman walking into a film only to find that every single female character in that story on screen is either flattened into a weak, manipulative character or is like a damsel in distress. She would instantly find it offensive, regressive, and exhausting. Now, flip that script. Imagine a man who's watching like a workplace drama, where, every male co-worker is permanently snickering or making overt sexist remarks or plotting against the heroine for her downfall or whatever. And meanwhile, the actual man in the theater is like, I'm barely surviving my own student loan, and my entire cognitive capacity today is being spent on like a massive text document my boss wants by like 5 p.m. I don't know. I don't even see the woman in my office. Like, he doesn't he's not able to relate to that character. You cannot write a good enduring story without building an empathetic bridge with your audience. It doesn't matter the kind of story you're telling, whether it be complex historical drama or romance, a narrative about class struggle, whatever it is. Your absolute responsibility as a writer, as an author, is to treat human beings like full three-dimensional entities, not two-dimensional corporate archetypes. You cannot successfully write a a narrative fundamentally rooted in gender equality while simultaneously dehumanizing an entire demographic by mass producing them with the exact same villainous specifications. It's an artistic failure on both sides of the ledger, writing women as like these flawless, faultless saints and all men as irredeemable monsters. This isn't activism, it's just remarkably bad writing. This brings us directly to the third pillar, the systemic lack of diversity in character traits. If you have seen my previous video, in my previous analysis, it was an analysis of why main male characters in romance are products. And in that video I highlighted how like modern romance novels mass produce identical archetypes. Like, if you look at the MMCs across the romance genre, they all appear the same. And in that I argued, as I will again now, that the sacred responsibility of true storytelling of a good writer is to serve as the mirror to the infinite messy uniqueness that we possess as actual human beings, that the characters we write in our stories should be different within the story and of course across stories. Yet modern feminist narratives are failing catastrophically at capturing this human spectrum. Instead of giving us diverse psyches, the industry is settled on this rigid assembly line of predictable caricatures. Like, irrespective of the movie or the book or even the genre, like, it doesn't matter which genre you are talking about, every demographic is forced to play the same exact flat narrative role. The heroine will be replicated from a single de facto blueprint, always aggressively badass, permanently armed with the unyielding snark, and entirely physically dominant, even against people she literally, genuinely, very clearly is not physically dominant against. The men are automatically slotted into the binary of the structural oppressor or the cartoonist misogynist. Like, there is absolutely zero depth to the main male characters or male characters in general. And of course, the ensemble cast, the secondary characters, the side characters in these stories, which I notice are often particularly those from marginalized or queer communities, they are stripped of their individual egos and they are repurposed as endless, uncritical echo chambers designed to solely validate the main character's choices. they do not have any opinion of themselves. Every opinion they have directly connects to the opinion the main character, the main female protagonist has. This relentless centering around a singular, flawless, or protagonist completely suffocates the supporting cast, leaving them as hollow, one dimensional props. They are just existing there to fill the story and nothing else. I have broken down this severe mechanical sort of dangers of this kind of writing, this main character kind of writing where everything revolves around the main character. In my main character syndrome, how main character syndrome has actually ruined literature. In that video, I've talked about it, and you can check that out if you want to understand how narcissist narrative structures ruin the integrity of a plot. When you strip a story of genuine psychological diversity, you make it fundamentally impossible for the real audience to connect with. Where are the stories about, like, the quiet, deeply introverted woman who doesn't know how to throw a punch, who isn't always loudly commanding every room she walks into, but who possesses terrifying quiet intelligence and unbreakable perseverance? Or why are we never shown a normal, everyday man who's just going about his work, simply struggling to make ends meet, and who treats the female lead with genuine platonic friendliness without any hidden agenda or a romantic subplot? By reducing the entire human experience down to just a few politically correct, factory calibrated character specifications, these stories all begin to taste exactly the same, appear exactly the same, read and feel exactly the same. And when every narrative starts to feel so indistinguishable, all the same, then of course the audience is going to just not lose interest, but like also actually push back against it. They're gonna be getting bored of it when every other movie is just the same repeated archetype trope and storytelling. This brings us to the final and perhaps the most damaging structure trap of it all, treating an absolute absence of emotion as the only true sign of strength. For generations, sociological critiques have rightly pointed out and continue to point out how traditional male conditioning, the entire system of patriarchy, is not just damaging to women, it's damaging to men. Because men from childhood are taught that softer emotions like crying is absolute sign of weakness and should be left for women, and to treat emotional vulnerability as a liability. But as storytellers and as a writer myself, I think we know that vulnerability is not weakness. It takes a profound, quiet courage of its own to be vulnerable. The deep irony of these modern corporate feminist narratives is that they have taken this exact toxic, emotionally stunted patriarchal template and pasted it directly onto women. Under this broken writing mechanic, a strong woman is strictly forbidden from falling in love, from weeping, from exhibiting selflessness, from seeking genuine interdependence, particularly from men. The script dictates that if she is to be strong, if she is to be successfully fighting patriarchy, taking down patriarchy, then she must first surgically excise, take out every single trace of emotional softness from her psyche. But in doing so, these narratives are actually looking down upon traditional femininity. They are subtly validating the regressive ideas that softness, empathy, and care are inherently weak traits, which they are not, and that they must be conquered to achieve power. A truly great badass woman who, does not need to be emotionally hollow. Like a great, strong, badass woman doesn't have to strip her emotions to appear strong. She can love deeply, she can act selflessly, she can protect her community, She can cultivate meaningful friendships with both women and men, with, anyone irrespective of gender, and still have the absolute resolve of taking a villain and putting them down in their place. In fact, narrative stakes, I think, hit the hardest when a character's strength is anchored by a soft side. Because when an audience sees what a character actually cares about, what they love, what makes them feel good, what it is that they want to protect, then their willingness to fight becomes profoundly meaningful. Furthermore, a protagonist doesn't always need to be a physical warrior to be powerful. Being unshakably confident, firm in your principles, yet soft spoken, highly perceptive, and brilliant without possessing some elite physical combat skills are immense, deeply compelling signs of strength. They are also, they also portray a person as strong. They are also, and they are also infinitely closer to the experience of actual human beings, because a majority of human beings cannot fight. Most real world women are nowhere close to these armored, hyper stylized marries you caricatures. Real women display strength across a vast kaleidoscopic spectrum that rarely involves taking down bad men using some unearned innate mastery of martial arts. Let's be entirely clear. Femininity is powerful. It deserves to be celebrated, explored, and portrayed with absolute gravity. And let me make a one crucial distinction here. Submissiveness, an inability to save oneself, or a refusal to speak up are not feminine traits. They are historical expectations ingrained into women by structural societal, social systems. True femininity, I think, is something a woman defines herself and tends to naturally on her own terms. Whatever it is that a woman, whatever character traits that a woman naturally tends to, is what true femininity is, not an artificial standard dictated to her by society, and certainly not a checklist handed down by some Hollywood studio. Let's be entirely honest with ourselves before we close the courtyard gates today. None of the movies that I talked about are actually feminist. Like, while I have used the term feminist movies and feminist narratives throughout the analysis for the sake of simplicity, and also because a lot of these movies claim to be so, the truth is that none of these films are actually feminist. They don't deserve these labels because they're simply poorly engineered stories with female protagonists, attached to it, and they use the ideology of feminism as this sort of shield to deflect any legitimate criticism. Like, if you criticize these films, the first person is like, "Oh, you're a misogynist. You just don't like, films with women in them." No, we just hate bad writing. That's it. Now, I'll admit a bit of personal bias here, but as a writer, some of my absolute favorite female characters have come from Chinese dramas that I have consumed. I watched specifically the historical ancient, the entire Shantia, wuxia genres. The narrative architecture of the female characters in these dramas are beautifully breathtaking, frequently breathtaking. Of course, I need to also point that out that the C-drama landscape is extremely massive, and there are problematic, regressive tropes that are sometimes seen in certain dramas, especially I think in the modern dramas, and also those weird short C dramas that appear on everyone's YouTube feed. Yeah, I actually avoid them, and for obvious reasons. But the well written ones that I actually do enjoy, that I actually do like, excel because their female characters are so distinct, highly individualized, and multidimensional. They aren't stamped out of like a singular factory calibrated model. If you're a writer a creator, or just simply somebody who loves watching movies, a media lover who wants to understand how to engineer a really strong female lead, a female protagonist across like a wide psychological spectrum, rather than just cloning the same generic physical fighter over and over again. Then I have written a complete breakdown of this, the template of how to write a strong woman, over at my Substack called Knights of Pendum. In that article, I look past the Western media checklist, and I take out examples from my favorite C dramas to map out exactly how these dramas actually construct entirely different archetypes of strength. You will have, we dissect everything from a brilliant, tactically intelligent lead to the classical warrior to the quiet, highly perceptive strategist who commands a room without ever raising her voice. That link is right down below in the description box. Do check that out. I'm sure you're going to love it, especially if you're a writer trying to write good female characters. And with that, the doors of the courtyard are being closed for today. I will see you next time in the courtyard. And until then, keep theorizing.